This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture. Thank you for joining us for the City of God podcast, where we are weekly talking about today's biggest cultural issues, all through the lens of God's infallible word. I'm Rabe Pacienza, and I'm joined by my co-host, John Rabe. John, great to see you.
Great to see you, Rob. Thank you for having me. And we have another terrific program today. A friend of ours who's doing some really exciting work through this ministry and in the heart of our nation's capital. So we're going to dig into some of it as we approach Election Day today.
Yeah, and that special guest is with us in studio. He is William Russell. He is a former member of the Trump White House, and currently he is the executive director for the D. James Kennedy Center for Christian Statesmanship in Washington, D.C. William, welcome to the City of God.
Gentlemen, thank you for having me.
So let's just dive into a very lively conversation concerning your past, your calling, and kind of how you arrived at CCS. But tell us a little bit about what it was like working for President Trump.
Well, each job there's so many jobs inside the government. My job was at the White House, serving as his trip director and deputy director of advance. So whenever the president leaves the White House and goes anywhere, there's a team that's ahead of him by a couple of days, a week. If he goes internationally, they're in country for a couple of weeks ahead of time. So I came from that world. I was running that shop, making sure that the teams were out in the field getting trips ready for the president. That was one job, and then I was also the trip director. So my day job, I sat behind a desk putting teams in the field, making sure that they're doing well and they're doing their job. My other job was traveling as trip director for the president. So that meant that whenever he left, I would travel with him as the who, what, where, when, why guy. I was the guy who was expected to answer all the questions that he may have about
on the spot. Yeah.
On the spot. Where are you going? What are you doing? Who you're talking to? Where are we going next? And so that was, when I say no day was the same, it's the truth. Like every day brought its new challenges. Every day it was a lot of fun, a lot of travel, but it was a lot of fun.
Okay.
Now, along with the fun, though, I know that, anybody who works in a White House will tell me, and you've told me, people don't have any concept of the day in, day out, just absolute, tsunami that it is to work in that sort of a pressure cooker. But add to that the fact that this was an administration that was under a lot of attack and remains under a lot of attack, including from, these lawfare prosecutors and so forth. That makes for a really eventful, not in a good way all the time, tense life for 4 years, and then even then some after you leave office, doesn't it?
It does. But you learn to compartmentalize a lot of this, right? A lot of it just ends up being noise. I don't know about you guys. I'm huge into football, and so one of the guys that I've always watched was Bill Belichick, and he has this line: "Do your job." Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the way that the approach that I had to take with my job is like it's one day at a time. Cut all the noise out. Like if I needed to, turn off Fox News, turn off whatever TV show, whatever news program I'm watching. Just focus on the mission that's in front of you, because that's the only thing that you can control is what's directly in front of you.
Yeah. And
the way that I saw it, if everyone took that approach inside this White House of just doing their job as it's laid out, we're going to succeed. There's no way that we're not going to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So, William, we'll talk a little bit about the transition from the Trump White House to CCS, but we've got an election coming up. And I know that you still keep in touch with the former president. What's the status of that relationship? What's it like? And also give us a little insight on kind of how you feel about the upcoming election.
Oh, man. Well, I can tell you that he's in good spirits right now. I mean, we feel as a campaign and as people who have been around him for a very long time, closer. Like we're in the best position to win today. That doesn't mean that you don't go out and go vote. That doesn't mean that you don't still get engaged, even though we have a couple weeks left. I say go get engaged right now today if you haven't already. But we're very confident. We feel really good in a lot of the swing states, and I think the president has proven time and time again that he has the stamina, he has the ability to win, and he's just showing it right now on the road with all the travel he's doing. I don't know if you guys caught this. A couple over the weekend, he went to McDonald's, donned the apron, and served to customers coming through that McDonald's. That's the kind of Donald Trump that I know. It's the guy who can step into that situation and feel right at home. And that's what's going to propel him across the finish line, because he's relatable, he's personable, and he cares about the American public.
Yep. That's the stuff middle America loves.
It really is. It really is.
And it shows who he is, because, again, I think a lot of people see the sort of blustery side at the rally, standing up and, talking about his political enemies and so forth. But there's, in that sort of situation, like at the McDonald's, there's such individual charm and friendliness that it shows a side of him that, I guess, let me phrase that more as a question. What is your experience of Donald Trump? How does it, because people find him endlessly fascinating, including his detractors and enemies. What is different about the Donald Trump that you know as opposed to the public perception generally of Donald Trump?
He's it's interesting because what you see from the public perception, I mean, for years, decades before, it was going on his TV show, The Apprentice, and firing people, right? Yeah, this gruff outside, like rough exterior. That is not, I mean, Donald Trump is a very, very kind man. He is a man that cares deeply. He's fiercely loyal. And it's kind of shown through in a variety of different ways to his direct staff, to his supporters out there in the field. There are a couple of times that I think of with the president that I've experienced. The most recent was when he went to East Palestine, Ohio after the train derailment. Obviously, the Biden administration had not been paying attention to this community for a while, and they were not willing to engage where they needed to engage. The president took it upon himself to go into that community, bring resources, and draw attention to that matter. Capped by, at the end of the trip, he walks into the McDonald's to get lunch to take to the fire station, and he turns to the lady that's behind the counter and says, "I know this menu better than you do." And like that is him. Yes. That wasn't scripted. That was a genuine comment. That's just kind of, and it was fun because when we were on the campaign trail in 2016, it was so much fun to watch him engage and banter back and forth with the audience. You'd think that giving a political speech that it's just one person talking at you. No, there was engagement, right? And I always knew that when he would grab the side of the podium and he'd drop his shoulder down and cock his head, I knew something was about to come flying out and it was going to be on the news. But that's the kind of guy that he is, and that's why people love him, because he says the stuff that others are afraid to say. He stands up for the common man. I mean, that's his mantra, and you would never expect that out of a billionaire, but it is.
Here's the problem: the three of us evangelical Christians, we know who we're voting for. We know what's at stake. We know the biblical precedent for voting and getting engaged. But the numbers that are coming out are staggering. Anywhere from 32 to 40 million. Even if it was half of that, 32 to 40 million predicted evangelicals that are eligible to vote won't vote this election season. Why do you think that is?
I'm not really sure. I don't really understand, because the way I see this is a binary choice, right? You've got one man in Donald Trump who, sure, we might not always enjoy his rhetoric. We might not always agree with his social positioning, but the other side, your alternative, is Kamala Harris. Your alternative hates you. We saw that just as recently as over the weekend as well, when she said, somebody yelled out, "Jesus is Lord," or "Jesus is King." And she said, "You got the wrong rally. Right? You're at the wrong rally."
That was "Jesus is Lord." Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. Yeah.
And that's incredible. Right. Like, this is a binary choice. We have two parties in this country that you get to pick from. So to sit at home and say, "Yeah, I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to get engaged," you're not fulfilling your civic duty. But moreover, you're not standing up for what you believe in.
Sure.
When you're potentially allowing someone to come into power, to retain power, that doesn't agree with you. actively hates you. Her and her party actively hate people who stand on principle and on faith.
Yeah. And I've gotten some heat recently because I go a step further and not only say it's a civic duty, but it's a biblical duty. And the reason I believe it's a biblical duty to vote is if God designed the government to promote the common good and to restrain evil through the sacred instrument of the sword, how can Christians not have a say and a voice and influence in who wields the sword in this nation? And one of the gifts that we've been provided in this constitutional republic from Almighty God is our opportunity and our privilege to exercise our voice at the ballot box. And so I'm with you. I thought it was a great answer. I don't know. It really is perplexing.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Will.
Well, it just feels like this is different than any other time before, right? We're now, in the past, we've all kind of come together. We could all be friends. I feel like that for people of faith, we're in a position right now that we are close to decimation. Having our own rights taken from us. So why would we not step up and do our best to make sure that people who are willing to at least protect, may not believe what we believe, but respect what we believe and are willing to protect our freedoms to believe what we believe? Why are we not engaging with that?
Yeah, I think anybody that loves the freedoms that have been established over the last 250 years in this nation, all informed by a Judeo-Christian worldview, regardless of what your private religious beliefs are or private religious convictions. I think anybody that loves the freedoms that are enjoyed in America needs to understand that they come from a particular worldview. And as I told the congregation here a few weeks ago, really this election, and ultimately every election, is a battle of worldviews. It's a battle of ideologies. It's are we choosing a worldview that best, not perfectly, but best aligns with the Judeo-Christian worldview that has led to 250 years of flourishing? Or are we frankly choosing a Marxist worldview that will, as you said, lead our nation to a state of floundering and a nation that I fear we wouldn't even be able to recognize in a few decades?
Yeah, and it's, I think it's also a matter of loving your neighbor. We're called to love our neighbor. We have this vote, and things like the sanctity of human life and religious liberty and
marriage and family.
Yeah. Well, if you allow those things to atrophy and be destroyed, and you had a say in it, you are failing to love your neighbor as well. And that brings us to what this. Of course, we as a ministry do not formally endorse a candidate, but we also unapologetically say there are some key issues that are biblical, that are non-negotiable. Things like sex and gender, things like marriage, as you just mentioned, Pastor Rob, things like the sanctity of human life. And while none of the candidates are perfect on it, none of the parties are perfect on it, there's one side that got Roe v. Wade overturned. There's one side that's been, continually defending religious liberty. And then there's another side that says, Jesus is Lord. Sorry, pal, you've got the wrong rally. So we have no problem speaking out on those sorts of issues. But if I could, I want to ask a little bit about the Center for Christian Statesmanship. William Russell, of course, the executive director. Pastor Rob, I want to ask you, though, as the CEO of Coral Ridge Ministries, a position that you've held for about 2.5 years now, one of the early moves that you made when you came here and took over that position was to revitalize the Center for Christian Statesmanship in Washington, D.C. From your perspective, why did you make a priority of that? Why did you believe that was important to the point that then you went and got us William Russell from the Trump administration to lead this effort?
Yeah. So when Dr. Kennedy launched the center in 1995, he rightly and appropriately called Washington, D.C. modern day Rome. And I really felt convicted 2 years ago that if the center was needed in 1995, how much more is it needed today in the 21st century? And so we relaunched it. We had a very modest beginning a couple of years ago, just reintroducing ourselves to staffers on the Hill, reintroducing ourselves to other like-minded nonprofits in Washington, D.C. We relaunched the annual awards ceremony. But I was convinced all along that we really needed boots on the ground. We needed somebody in Washington, D.C., living in Washington, D.C., working in Washington, D.C., but also somebody that really understood Washington, D.C. And that's really what led us to William Russell, somebody who started on the Hill, ended up in the White House, but really understood that all of life is a sacred calling and understood that God designed government and God designed for people of faith to be engaged in government, to be salt and light and shalom. And just been so impressed with what William has already done in a very short period of time. I think you've only been on board for about a year as executive director. But let me turn the question to you. Why CCS? Why now? You could have done 100 different things with the rest of your career, but why CCS and why now?
So the way I look at CCS, it's a ministry to Capitol Hill, to some of, in my opinion, some of the loneliest people. There are a lot of people who work in that building, in that Capitol building, but they're all, it's a knife fight. Every day is a knife fight in a phone booth for these guys. Like, they don't know who they can trust. They don't know who's using them. And especially those people of faith, right? And that network is just, it's there, but it needs to be built up, right? Yeah. I come at this from the position of, I used to be that staffer, right? I was that staffer, just graduated college, and my background after, growing up, I came from a PCA church. I'm steeped in theology. Like, I understand what I believe, why I believe it, and I knew how to defend it. But it's amazing what happens when you come with all of these things to Capitol Hill and you get kind of sucked in by the city. It will literally suck you in, spit you out, chew you up and spit you out. And I fell victim to that, right? And so that kind of is just always stuck with me in the back of my head. Just the loneliness that you feel, the peer pressure that you need to go out and do something, that you need to go hang out in places where you really shouldn't be. And you do things that you really shouldn't do, but you're trying to fit in with everybody else, right? CCS is supposed to be a community of people who believe all generally the same thing, and just give them a community that they can rely on each other, right? Think of it as almost like a small group for Christian staffers, right? And Christian members, or people who share the same faith, right? That's what CCS is here for. I boil it down when I'm doing these elevator pitches to 3 E's, right? Evangelize, encourage, and educate. Those are the 3 kind of principles that CCS has. Obviously, evangelism is at the top. That's what we're here to do, is to go out and bring people to Christ. Now, what happens after? You're great. We've got somebody who just committed their life to Christ. It's a staffer, young staffer, but he's working in an office full of non-believers, and that's a lot of pressure to put on somebody. So that's where the encouragement comes along. That's where CCS can hold events. They can have, we have this big, beautiful office now. That God has blessed us with. 5 blocks from Capitol Hill, new headquarters. Yeah. So we can, and it's a nice patio where we can put a fire pit back there and just kind of host events where we can commune with others, right? That's what CCS is here to do, is to bridge that gap, to help people grow in that manner. Now, that's a spiritual growth, and that's some of the soul care and we've got great partners who help out with that in DC, the soul care portion. The next portion is personally, as a policy guy, I get really excited about, is the education front. So we've got a litany of resources around us, thanks to CRM, thanks to Core Ridge, of people who can speak life into the policy that Washington, D.C. is considering, whatever day, week, month, year, whatever's happening. The Bible is sufficient for all things in life, right? So if we're taking up a piece of legislation that has to do with, say, the NDAA, our Defense Authorization Bill, what does the Bible say about war? What does the Bible say about our national defense? And we can look at history and we can apply that and make sure and encourage members of Congress and their staff to be taking the approach of looking at every piece of policy through a biblical worldview lens. Now, CCS is never going to go to Capitol Hill and say, we want you to vote yes on HR 17. No, we're not going to do that. But we do want to give staffers and members the tools to look at whatever they're considering, and this is not just policy. This is how you engage with your constituents. This is what's happening during that committee hearing, right? We want to encourage them to look at everything that they're doing through the biblical worldview lens, which is the challenge that all of us face. Hey, you don't have to work on Capitol Hill to do that. We all do that in our daily lives.
Goodness, statesmen that are operating with a biblical worldview. It sounds like 1776.
That's right.
Exactly.
Wouldn't
That's amazing.
Be nice again?
William, where can people find, if they're new to the ministry, this falls under the banner of Coral Ridge Ministries, the Center for Christian Statesmanship, our outreach to policymakers on the Hill up in Washington, D.C. If people are new to this initiative, where can they find out more information about CCS?
Statesman.org is our website. So www.statesman.org. On that, you'll find contact information. You'll find ways to engage with us. But one of the most important things that are on there that we just put up are position papers. It's kind of like white papers on a variety of different issues. That's on a resource tab. When I encourage people who are interested in understanding more about specifically the policy side of things and how we're taking a biblical worldview approach, you can find that in those position papers. And I encourage everybody to log on and check that out.
I think this is such a worthy initiative for people out there that are listening to partner with us, partner in prayer, partner in financial giving. I can't think of a better organization and ministry in Washington, D.C. that seeks to be light, as Dr. Kennedy said, to modern day Rome. William, we're grateful for you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for answering the call. As I said earlier, you could have done a number of things, but thank you for taking on CCS, relaunching it in Washington, D.C. for such a time as this.
Exciting. Amen.
And that's all the time we have today for the City of God podcast. If you are encouraged or inspired by our conversation with William Russell, the Executive Director of the Center for Christian Statesmanship in Washington, D.C., we pray that you would pass this along to family member or friends or anybody that wants to think about what does it mean to be salt and light on Capitol Hill for such a time as this. And we pray that you will continue to engage with us every week right back here at the City of God. The City of God podcast is produced by Coral Ridge Ministries and made in partnership with the Institute for Faith and Culture. Visit us at cityofgodpodcast.com to access all of our previous episodes. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or anywhere you get podcasts. A full video version of this podcast is available on YouTube. This is the City of God podcast, where Christ meets culture.